What is the most powerful book that I own? That is a very interesting question. No one had ever asked me that question before until a few days ago. And I thought it was really, really interesting enough that I wanted to make a video about it. So people have asked me, you know, what's my favourite book? What's the best book I've ever read? What is the most valuable book in my collection? But no one's ever asked me what the most powerful book is. But even though that's a question I've never been asked before, I instantly had an answer. The most powerful book I own is this one, Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. This is my copy of it. 1,168 pages long. You could kill a spider with this quite happily. Why is this book powerful? Well, chances are, as soon as I hefted up a copy of Atlas Shrugged, you had a reaction to it. If you're familiar with the book, you probably had a reaction to it. Either you like it, or you hate it. There is no in between. It is one of the most polarizing books it is the most polarizing book I've ever encountered. People either love it and love what they think it stands for, or they hate it and they hate what they think it stands for. And I'm being very specific in my language when I say what they think it stands for. Because to me, the power of Atlas Shrugged has nothing to do with what is contained within the book itself. It's all to do with how people react to it and why they react to it in that particular way. So this copy of the book I used to keep on display in my office back when I used to work in corporate America. I had my own office on the top floor next to the C-suite, and when people came in there, they'd see this book, and sometimes it would spark a conversation. And the thing is, the conversations that arose because of this book would tell me so much about the person I was having the conversation with. I mean, for a start, if they liked the book, then that told me a lot about their beliefs and their values. You know, because this is a book about objectivism, about rational selfishness, which is the whole idea of you have to fill your own cup before you can fill anyone else's. It's about exceptionalism. It's a very uniquely American book. It's a very uniquely capitalist book. It's almost like the opposite of the Communist Manifesto. Ayn Rand is almost like the polar opposite of Karl Marx. So you get a lot of information about somebody's beliefs if they like this book, and conversely, if they hated this book, if they didn't like what it stands for, or they didn't like what they believe it stood for, that would give you a lot of information about that person. Because these days it's very trendy to crap on Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged and what that book stands for, because we live in the day and age of Bernie Sanders and democratic socialism and the greater good, and taxing billionaires and almost anti-exceptionalism. And there are two camps. There are people who love it and the people who hate it. And yeah, you would automatically find out which group those people were in as soon as they told you what they thought about the book. But the power of the book doesn't stop there. Because when you dig a little deeper into people who have an opinion about Atlas Shrugged, you will very often find that they have an opinion about what they think the book stands for that isn't necessarily based off their own experience of it. I have a theory that I cannot back up with science, I admit, that 70% of the people who rave about Atlas Shrugged, who are Randroids, as they call them, people who really, really believe in this stuff, I think 70% of them have never read the book. I genuinely believe that. And when it comes to people who hate Atlas Shrugged, or profess to hate Atlas Shrugged, and claim to hate what they think Atlas Shrugged stands for, I honestly believe 99% of them have never read it. I honestly believe that the majority of people who have an opinion one way or another about Atlas Shrugged have never read the book. And why should they? It's 1,168 pages. And Ayn Rand, don't get me wrong, she's like her contemporary Ian Fleming. She has a wonderful turn of phrase. She comes up with really, really vivid characters. Her books are crammed full of really interesting concepts and ideas. But this is a 1,168 page novel that could have been 300 pages. It's basically Ayn Rand as a crazy Russian lady cramming a political manifesto into a romantic suspense novel. I think there are 70 pages of it or so that are just John Galt's speech into a radio. So it is not an easy book to read through. It got panned by critics at the time when it was released, and even now, it is a commitment to read through this entire book. I honestly think if somebody rewrote this book for 300 pages long rather than 1,168 pages and just, kept to the themes of it, it would be a bestseller. But this book as it is unwieldy. This book is for killing spiders. So that's why I think a lot of people who love the book have never read it, and I think almost all the people who hate the book have never read it. But that in itself tells you a lot about them. If people love this book, and you find out they haven't read it, you have to say, why do you love this book when you haven't actually read it? Where do you get this opinion from? And normally they get that opinion from external sources. There are places like the Atlas Society, which is a think tank that pushes like Ayn Rand's objectivist agenda. There are all sorts of people who rave about this book because they have, the conservative and libertarian opinions and things. I mean, I know that there are certain things in this book that really resonate with me on a personal level. As in, I believe in personal responsibility. I believe in, trying to do the best you can individually, taking pride in what you do, striving to be a better person. To me, that was what I took away from this book. I do not think this book has any business being the basis of a system of political or economic government. Just like I don't think Karl Marx has any reason, has any business, putting together a framework for how society should be done. Ayn Rand was a crazy Russian broad. Karl Marx was some loser living in London whose entire lifestyle was subsidised by the Siemens Corporation. These books are interesting to read. You shouldn't base government systems off them. But I digress. Anyway, when you come up with the reason why people love or hate this book, it is so often externally based. People who hate this book, why do they hate this book? They hate this book because they read an article on crack.com that went on about how terrible Ayn Rand was. Or they saw a couple of memes on Instagram about how terrible Ayn Rand was. There was a very, very funny comic strip I saw about what Ayn Rand's society might be like. And at the end of the day, so many people have based their opinion and ideas about this book on somebody else's opinion about this book, and that tells you an awful lot about it. I truly, earnestly believe you shouldn't have an opinion about any book unless you've read it. Really don't think so. And yet people do, and about this book more than any, which I find really, really interesting. And so, it's powerful to me because when I had it on display in my office and when people came in and spoke to me about it, I would first of all find out which side of the fence they were on. That would tell me a lot about them. And then I'd find out whether they read the book or when they hadn't read the book. And that would tell me a lot about them as well. That would basically tell me where these people get their ideas and their concepts and their beliefs from. And it's not from their own opinions of the subject matter. It is normally regurgitated by somebody else's opinion. And to be honest, a lot of the people who even write blog posts and articles about Atlas Shrugged, they themselves haven't read it. So lots of people have like third-hand opinions about Atlas Shrugged based off their opinion not having read the book, being based off someone else's opinion who might not have read the book, being based off, hopefully, someone's opinion who had read the book. Yeah, very, very convoluted. And then it gets even deeper down the rabbit hole. There are so many people that I've actually met who I talk to about Atlas Shrugged, and they have an opinion about it, and then when I press them on whether they read the book or not, they tell me yes. And they haven't. And I know that because I have like 3 different questions that I keep in my back pocket. So if anybody ever claims that they've read the book and I don't necessarily believe them, I'll just throw in these questions, like who are Dagny's lovers in the book? And if they can't answer that question in a way that makes me believe they've read the book, that also says so much about them. Like, what sort of person would have an opinion about a book they've never read and be so insecure about that opinion that they feel the need to lie about actually reading the book? That tells you a lot about who they are as a person. But at the same time, I've been guilty of that myself. I think a lot of us have. I remember when I first moved to America and I was on Facebook and MySpace and writing big diatribes and Blogger. Oh, Blogger was a big thing back then. I would often like wax lyrical about the I was very, very much into atheism at that time, and I'd be like, oh, well, I'm familiar with the Bible. I went to a theological university. My grandfather was a chaplain in the Royal Air Force. I am familiar with the Bible. Of course I wasn't. I've never sat down and read the Bible. I mean, I was raised Church of England. We didn't have a Bible. We had the Book of Common Prayer, which is something completely different. And it was kind of a big awakening for me when I finally stopped and took accountability. It was like, I do not have any integrity if I'm sitting here arguing with people on the internet about religion, claiming that I am familiar with the Bible when I'm clearly not. And so that was a piece of personal reflection I went on about 15 years ago that hopefully I've stuck to. And I just find it very interesting because when I talk to people who have such a passionate opinion about Atlas Shrugged and then they reveal that they haven't read it, to me it's like looking into a mirror of who I was 15 years ago, and it's not a very flattering mirror, I have to admit. So, long story short, Atlas Shrugged is the most powerful book that I own, and not necessarily for anything that is contained within it. Although if you have a lot of time to spare and the perseverance to get through it, it is worth reading because there are some very interesting ideas in it. As an immigrant to America, as somebody who believes passionately in the American dream and has been, fighting so hard to make that dream come true for myself, there is a lot in this book that does resonate with me. But also, there's a lot that doesn't resonate with me, that I think is stupid, that is dumb. And at the end of the day, I really do believe that, people who think Ayn Rand's politics and Ayn Rand's philosophy should be the basis of a government are no dumber, but no smarter than the people who think Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto should be the basis of a government and economics and things. These are just writers, crazy writers, who have ideas that are interesting, that resonate with people, but they're not politicians, they're not philosophers, they're just writers. You might as well grab one of my books and use that as a basis philosophy. What's the philosophy in my biker books is everybody carries the weight, nobody rides for free, which to a certain extent is kind of the the self-reliance thing that I got from this book. But at the same point, I don't think there should be a political party that's like, we're going to stand on the manifesto of everybody carries their weight, nobody rides for free. Because you know what? Every single book that I write in this series, at the end of the day, kind of subverts that. Where you have a character who fails to carry his weight, and then through love and friendship, they realize they can ride for free when they need to. And I think unless you have read this book, you don't really have the basis to understand whether what other people say about it is true, or whether you have the same opportunity to kind of like subvert the message in the same way. Right, that's a very long-winded way of explaining how I feel about this book, but it is a very powerful book. I will continue having this book proudly on display everywhere I go and wherever I live. Not because I am a student of Ayn Rand necessarily, but because I love to learn about other people based on how they react to it. That's why the book is so powerful. Anyway, I'll be back with another video soon. Great to chat to you. Ciao.